that the sun shines down its power to all the world and makes the wind blow strong as it will. So lovely earth can stay lovely still. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Energy Week with George Harvey and the famous Tom Fennell, who is absent. Tom got hurt. He fell down, but no broken bones. He'll be better. He was absent last week too, but he is on the mend and hopefully will be in next week. Every day I go find the news on energy and climate change, and I put together a group of 10 to 15 items, each item consisting of a synopsis of about 50 or 55 words and a link to the original article. And I put those up on my blog, goharvey.wordpress.com. And every Thursday morning, Tom usually and I do an hour-long show of the 20 or so that we have found the most interesting in the week. That having been said, I think we could start right in on Thursday, March 17th. Our first item here is from Common Dreams. Nearly a quarter of all deaths around the world are caused by living and working in toxic and polluted environments, and the worst affected are children, the poor, and the elderly, according to one report released by the World Health Organization. The information that we have had from the World Health Organization in the past has indicated that approximately 7 million people die of air pollution alone every year. And it's hard to do the engineering here alone. Tom usually does it. That comes to almost 10,000 people a day for outdoor air pollution, and another 10,000 people a day indoor air pollution. The indoor air pollution coming from unvented fires, but the outdoor air pollution is mostly from fossil fuels being burned for fuel, for generating power, for transportation, for heating homes, and so forth. And that comes to about 10,000 people a day in terms of just the outdoor air pollution. And this is a serious problem, but here they've looked at other sources of pollution, including chemical toxicity, things that get into wells, things that get into food, and so forth. Our next item, and this is something that is also kind of distressing, comes from Clean Technica. NOAA's Mauna Loa Observatory in Hawaii reported a spike in CO2 levels this week, 3.05 parts per million. This is from last year, which is the largest year-to-year increase ever observed in the 56 years of recording and research done at the station. And I'm sorry to say I've got the wrong graphic up, but that's okay. I'll get to that soon. It was the fourth consecutive year that CO2 grew more than 2 parts per million. The result of this is that our CO2 levels in the atmosphere are now 402.59 parts per million. Anybody who knows the organization 350.org, they're getting their name from the fact that they believe that, and scientists believe, that the wise high limit for CO2 in the atmosphere is 350 parts per million, and we have gone to above 402.5. Now I get to that graphic. Whoop, wrong graphic again, but I can switch it. There we go. This is from The Hill. It is likely to be the first year that natural gas has a higher market share for U.S. electricity generation than coal does, according to federal analysts. The EIA, that's the Energy Information Administration, is predicting that when 2016 ends, natural gas will be generating 33% of the country's electricity compared to 32% for coal. And the graph that you see there, you can see coal was well above 50% for much of the recent past, and it has been on a big decline in the last 8 years, as renewables have increased and natural gas has increased. The increase in natural gas, however, I wonder how long that's going to continue, because natural gas infrastructure is not coming online the way renewable infrastructure is. So we'll see how that goes. Our next item is from February, March 18th, and it is, and get to it, there we go. And it is an opinion piece called "So, Was That Climate Change?" While the broad trends of climate change and our role in causing it by burning fossil fuels have been clear for decades, listen up folks, this has been clear for decades. Anybody who says that it isn't clear is telling you a fib created either by them or by somebody who they know or who pays them, who has fooled them, whatever. It was not possible until recently to tie a specific storm, drought, flood, or heat wave to long-term warming trends. Thankfully, that is changing. This is from CNN, and what they have said in the article, which you can find at the blog geoharvey.wordpress.com, February, March 18th, is that the drought in California and the high temperatures that we have been seeing, about 0.9 to 1 degree Celsius, which is the better part of 2 degrees Fahrenheit, of the temperature that we've seen has come from CO2. About 0.2 to 0.3 degrees is the fault of El Nino. And they have said that the drought in California is not from carbon emissions, but the heat associated with the drought has made it worse. And that is associated with carbon emissions. So that's from CNN. We have our next item, which is temperatures well above normal. I'm sorry, these things are just coming out. It's so depressing. CNN also reported February smashed all previous records for the warmest February and even the warmest month compared to its average, according to NOAA. February temperatures averaged 1.21 degrees Celsius, which is 2.18 degrees Fahrenheit, above the 20th century average. The past 3 months have the top 3 places in temperature. Now, I'll call your attention to a couple of things in this map of the globe. The dark red is the highest temperature compared to average. Red is high. Whitish is basically the same. Blue is colder, and dark blue is much colder. The darkest red is 5 degrees Celsius above average. That is 9 degrees or more Fahrenheit above average. And you'll see that Alaska got this, as did Eastern Europe and Western Siberia. And the reason I'm pointing that out is because these are areas that are rather far from the equator. And on the equator, if you look in the Pacific west of this South America, you'll see that there is a not quite so dark red area that is above normal. And that area is the area that is associated with El Nino. And the El Nino is driving part of the increased temperatures, but certainly by no means all of it. This from CNN. Clean Technica gave us a piece. This, by the way, is on March 18th still. Doubling the global share of renewable energy by 2030 could save $4.2 trillion annually, 15 times as much as it costs. This is the primary conclusion of a report from the International Renewable Energy Agency. It examines options to boost renewable energy from its current 18% to 36% by 2030. This is from Clean Technica. And what is involved in that $4.2 trillion is a lot of different things. One of them is the cost of medical problems associated with fossil fuels, which, by the way, in the United States come to about $250 billion a year. And the deaths that are associated with fossil fuels, which come to, as I said earlier, about 10,000 people a day. Just to put that kind of into context, I've brought this up on this show before, but to put it into context, the attacks in Paris, the terrorist attacks in Paris, killed 137 people, including the terrorists, in the course of 217 minutes. And at about 10,000 people a day, they killed approximately 1,368 people in those same 217 minutes. So the terrorists killed only 10% of the people that, of the number of people that were killed by the fossil fuels industry and consumers of fossil fuels. Now, we should bear in mind, we are all consumers of fossil fuels in one way or another, or at least almost all of us. There may be a few out there who are not, but if you're buying food in a grocery store, you're buying food that was probably created with fossil fuels. Agriculture is one of the biggest fossil fuel users in the United States. The food is transported with fossil fuels. Likely the home that you live in, the school that the kids go to, the grocery store where you got that food, the church, the municipal building, all of this stuff is heated by fossil fuels, powered by fossil fuels. And the plastics that we use come from fossil fuels. A lot of stuff comes from fossil fuels. It is a serious problem to get off of that. But we have very clear technologies to reduce our consumption of fossil fuels to very nearly nothing. And when it comes to generating power, that's the easy part. When it comes to generating heat, that's the easy part. When it comes to transportation, that's a little more difficult. But there are answers to these problems, and we're going to implement them. Although there are people who very much want us not to. Okay, CNews Renewables sent us this information. The California Public Utilities Commission gave 392 megawatt Ivanpah CSP, that's concentrated solar concentrated solar power park, more time to reach the output levels agreed in its power purchase agreement. Pacific Gas and Electric has agreed to give the owners of the power plant until mid-July to improve performance. Ivanpah is just not doing as much as they had hoped, and that is a bit of a problem, and I'm not sure how they're going to improve performance with this thing, but they're going to try to do it. This is the huge solar thermal plant in California, which consists of a large number of mirrors, shining light on a tower, heating the tower up. Inside the tower is salt, which melts. And by the way, you have to melt the salt and get it running before you even start this. So it requires natural gas to get the plant started. And that plant will produce power because the molten salt is used to heat water, to drive turbines, produces power all day. When the sun goes down, it's still hot, so it produces power going into the evening. And the result of this is that it'll produce power through the entire time that the peak demand is going, and start online early the next morning. This is a lot of power, but it is not what they had agreed to in terms of their power purchase agreements. So they've got a bit of a problem with that one, and it'll be interesting to see where that goes. Okay, our next item comes on Saturday, March 19th. It comes from Renew Economy, Dispelling the Nuclear Baseload Myth. This is an opinion piece. Nothing renewables can't do better. The main claim used to justify nuclear power is that it is the only low-carbon power source that can supply, quote, reliable baseload electricity, end quote. But renewables can match grid demand continuously in a way nuclear power cannot. This picture, by the way, is a picture of a wind farm in Mecklenburg-Vorpommern in the northeastern part of Germany. And Mecklenburg-Vorpommern is powered 100% by renewable energy. A lot of that comes from wind. The state of Mecklenburg-Vorpommern gets a lot of its power from biomass, a lot of its power from wind, and it also produces power from coal, which is produced because it has, the coal plants have contracts to provide power to other parts of Germany, and I believe also to Poland, possibly even to Denmark, although that's hard to imagine. But they export power, and have got 100% renewable production to cover the power they need. Now, what's happening in this particular item from Renew Economy, they're saying, okay, sun, wind, other power sources, renewable power sources, including things like biogas, biomass, hydro, you name it, possibly geothermal. These are producing power that is more reliable than baseload power. In theory, this is correct. The theory is that you can turn power plants on and off. Wind power is particularly easy to turn off when you've got the wind going. You can get power from a widely distributed sources across the grid. Wind power, again, you can be drawing power from wind plants that are hundreds of miles apart. And this is all controlled, in theory, by computers that say turn on or turn off to power plants. And the same thing to demand. They can tell the water heater to turn off because the demand is high, or to turn on because the demand is low. And there have been studies that have come up, one of them recently in the United States. The people doing the study concluded that we could almost balance our grid just by balancing the draw that's done by the water heaters in the United States, which would mean that they would be drawing electricity at night, and not during the daytime. And in fact, that theory is supported by things that are actually going on in the field. For example, in Germany, Germany had the most reliable power grid in Europe for years and years and years, up until 2001 or thereabouts, when they started into their Energiewende. And in 2011, when they really got serious about the Energiewende because they felt that they had to get off nuclear power, they started putting renewable power on very rapidly. And the result of this was that they took what had been the most reliable grid in Europe and they made it more reliable by going to renewable power with the computer-driven power balancing systems, which are known as virtual power plants. The same thing has happened elsewhere. The utilities in some parts of the United States have found that with wind power being more or less paid, regardless of whether the power that they produce is needed or not by the federal government, it means that they are going to run even if the power costs on the grid are negative. And so some utilities, for example, one in Dallas, Texas, and I forget the name of the utility, but I could look it up if anybody wants to know, has a special plan for people who want to purchase wind power. They pay a little extra for wind power during the daytime, and at night from 9 p.m. until 6 a.m. they get their power for free. And the thing that they can do with that power, among other things, is to charge batteries. So they can actually get free power at night and use it to run their house from batteries during the daytime. And that really cuts their power bill down. What it means is that the utility, if it's buying the power for less than zero, can make money on it even though it gives it away. And that actually does happen. The price of electricity goes down to as low as negative $100 per megawatt hour, which is the equivalent of negative 10 cents per kilowatt hour. And that means that if they buy power for negative $50 per megawatt hour and they sell it to homeowners for zero, every megawatt hour that they buy, they're making $50 on. So this is a new paradigm we're moving into, and things are different than they used to be. That was from Renew Economy, and that was on March 19th. Now our next item, which I'm going to put up on the screen, comes from Triple Pundit. No, sorry. Yes, Triple Pundit. It was already turning out to be a very bad year for the clean image of natural gas. With earthquakes in Oklahoma, water pollution in Pennsylvania, a gas leak in California, and new federal emissions scrutiny. Now a proposed LNG export terminal in Oregon on the coast failed to get approval. This map is worth looking at. It's a map that came with the article, I think. Certainly it's a map. I believe this came with the article, and what they're showing there in the map is earthquakes in the central part of the United States, whereas everybody knows there are very few earthquakes. It happens that if you look at this map, I should point out the earthquakes that appear in blue. These are above magnitude 3. The earthquakes in blue happened in the 35 years from 1973 to 2008, and the earthquakes in red happened in the 8 years following that. There were 885 earthquakes in 35 years, 2,310 in the next 8 years, and if you look, you can see the red blob in northern central Oklahoma is really kind of stunning. There were no earthquakes in that area during the earlier time. During the later time, there were a lot of them, and it happens now that Oklahoma is getting more earthquakes than California, above magnitude 3. California is a much bigger state. California is also basically the home of most earthquakes in the United States, or was until the seismic activity in Oklahoma came along. And the seismic activity in Oklahoma coincides both in time and in place with fracking to get oil and gas. The graph on the bottom there, you'll see as a slope going up from left to right, that is blue in the earlier period. It's basically straight. This is the cumulative number of earthquakes that have happened since 1973. And as they accumulate, if they're constant, they will be a straight line. Starting in about 2008, 2009, that straight line started into a curve with a very, very sharp upward swing. That is because of seismic activity that was induced by fracking. And this is a very serious problem. So we don't have a clear way of getting that oil and gas out of the ground without fracking, but the fracking is causing a lot of mischief. Now, what this article points out is that it isn't just the fracking in Oklahoma. We've got water pollution in Pennsylvania. There were two couples in Pennsylvania who successfully sued a gas company for polluting their wells with materials that came from fracking. I believe this may be the first time we've had a lawsuit of that type. The gas leak in California is one that Tom and I have talked about many, many, many times. The space in an empty oil well was filled with natural gas, and the natural gas was put down there under intense pressure, 2,750 pounds per square inch. As I've said before, that's about a quarter of the pressure in the chamber of a shotgun when it goes off. That was underground, and the way that it got there was in pipes that were about 61 years old, and the pipes way far underground started to leak, And they leaked so fast and so hard that they were blowing pieces of ground around at the surface, many hundreds of feet higher. And of course, they were putting out natural gas, which had been scented with probably ethyl mercaptan, which is a very foul-smelling material that is there just to tell people that there's a leak. And the combination of natural gas and ethyl mercaptan meant that thousands of people had to be evacuated from a neighborhood in Los Angeles. And the people complained to the Sierra Club, which hired a pilot to go find out what was going on. He was made nauseous by the gas in the air that he flew through hundreds or thousands of feet above this thing, and it just blew natural gas, thousands of tons a day, for day in, day out, for months. The company that owns the gas had failed to tell anybody that there was a problem. The problem became evident because people were getting sick. It became clear what the problem was when the Sierra Club took action. And this is something which finally was plugged by stopping things way down far underground, and then putting basically a concrete plug into the pipes at that very low level. Now, what's happened in the article? It says that a liquefied natural gas export terminal in Oregon failed to get approval. Gas is looking down. Our next item is from the Manila Bulletin, although it could have come from a number of other sources. According to a report by the Lazard Investment Fund, actually I don't think this is an investment fund. I think it's just Lazard Associates. The cost of electricity generated with wind power fell 61% in the years from 2009 to 2015, and the cost of solar energy fell 82%. This puts renewables into a price range that's competitive with fossil fuels, coal, or oil. And we will get back to that very soon. In fact, it will be our next item, which comes from March 20th, Sunday, March 20th, Clean Technica. So I'll just go straight into that. The Spanish utility company Endesa purchased 410 gigawatt hours of solar electricity during a recent solar energy auction for Portugal and Spain at a price of 39.6 euros per megawatt hour, which is 43.82 American dollars per megawatt hour. The quarterly auctions relate to roughly 500 gigawatt hours of generation, varying at times of the year. Now, this is extremely important because it gives us good numbers of what is going on. In this particular case, the wholesale price of unsubsidized solar power, the Spanish and Portuguese solar power is not subsidized. In fact, they charge you extra if you've got solar on your roof. That has fallen to 4.4 cents per kilowatt hour in this purchase agreement. And what that means in turn is that even with batteries included, if you can get power at 4.4 cents per kilowatt hour, even with the batteries included, you're going to have power that is cheaper than natural gas. Solar power with storage is cheaper at this price than, not all, but most natural gas. And it puts us into a situation where we can see the price of natural gas is low. That is to say, the price of the fuel is low. The price of solar power is still dropping. The price of natural gas is not going to drop much, if at all. That means that the price of natural gas produced electricity is not going to drop much, but the price of solar power is. It's still dropping. The price of battery storage is still dropping. It's dropping very, very fast. The result of this is that we will see more of this in the future. And I fully believe that we're going to see the price. Actually, I talked to a solar installer who is very big on batteries. Recently, I was writing an article for Green Energy Times, where I write a lot of articles for Green Energy Times, and he told me that he has been paying very special attention to the prices of batteries, and he has come to the conclusion that either 2016 or 2017 is going to be the year when storage at the home level becomes an option for people to save money. And what this means is that if you go back to one of those plans with a utility that makes it possible for you to buy power at a cheaper price at night and pay a higher price during the daytime, it would mean that you could buy power at a low price and then store it for the daytime and have all your electricity at a lower price. And as a matter of fact, Green Mountain Power is selling Tesla batteries, and they have said if you buy a Tesla battery for $6,500 installed, they will, if you're willing to do this, the plan, they will pay you 30 some odd dollars, $35 or something. I don't know the exact figure, but it is above $30 and less than 40 per month for the right to fill your battery up at night and draw power from it during the daytime if they have to. So you can get electricity at a lower price doing that. And of course, I just mentioned the utility in Dallas that has a wind power plan. Okay, our next item comes from the UK, and if you want to know anything about NIMBYism, there it is, not in my backyard. Not even a backyard in my backyard. This is an abandoned farmhouse in the UK at the edge of an open pit coal mine. And that coal mine has almost certainly closed because they aren't mining coal in the UK anymore. But still it's a mess, and it's probably going to remain a mess. They've probably destroyed the groundwater under that house, so if it had a well, the well probably doesn't work anymore. And this is what has been happening in the UK as a result of coal. Well, the UK has changed its ideas of what it's going to do with renewable power. This comes from Sustainavate. The UK government will make net zero emissions a goal that it agreed to at the COP21 talks in Paris. They will make that the law, following advice of the Committee on Climate Change, according to reports. The UK's legal target will change from what it had been, which was an 80% reduction in emissions, to a net zero economy. This means that instead of reducing their emissions by 80%, they will reduce them on net to zero. Now, honestly, I'll believe it when I see it, because the government of the UK has been saying a lot of things for a long time about its wonderful green policies, and then pulling the rug out of green power in the UK. The only thing that they're helping these days is offshore wind, and it looks to me like the only thing that they're interested in facilitating is big companies making a lot of money. Nonetheless, they have made a law which will bind future governments, unless they change the law, to do the things that they have not been paying to have done, I guess. Our next item comes from the Hans India. The growth of cheaper renewable power is outpacing that of nuclear in India, and renewables now account for much more production. In the fiscal year 2014 to 2015, renewable energy accounted for 5% of electricity generated in India, compared to 3.2% for nuclear. That is 5.6 for renewables, 3.2 for nuclear. And this is despite the fact that the nuclear power in India has been getting a lot of press. There's been a lot of opposition to nuclear power in India. And as a matter of fact, the Indians have a tendency to be very vocal about many kinds of power, including coal. because India is increasing, or theoretically increasing, its production of electricity by coal, although they basically, the situation with coal is very strange. They were importing coal as fast as they could only less than 2 years ago. They had serious problems of a lack of coal at the power plants. There were some plants that only had a few days of supply. And now they have a situation that has changed radically to one in which they are reducing imports, and they have so much supply that they are not sure where they can put it all. Kind of mirroring the situation with oil in the United States, perhaps. Our next item comes from Monday, March 21st. And it is another one of those kind of sad things that comes along. According to NASA, February 2016 was the most anomalously warm month in 135 years of record keeping. At 1.35 degrees Celsius, which is 2.43 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than the 1951 to 1980 average. While recurring El Nino event certainly drives short-term oscillation, the long-term warming trend is quite apparent. And this is from Clean Technica. It happens that the NOAA and NASA are basically in agreement on this. We talked about the NOAA numbers earlier, from NOAA being obviously the weather people, but NASA has the advantage of being able to see the temperatures from outer space, and which is where a lot of the maps that we see come from. And as you can see, this is a chart that goes from January to December. The January and February of 2016 are way above what these other years had. 2015 was a record year, so we are way above a record that has already been set. 2010 and 2014 were also record years. This is a situation that, quite frankly, I find kind of scary. And I want to tell you, I am a person who is very optimistic about climate change. I believe we're going to deal with climate change. We're going to deal with carbon emissions. We're going to deal with a bunch of other things that we have to deal with, pollution and so forth. We have to, or we're not going to survive. And we have all of the technology that we need to deal with these things. And the technology that we've got is sufficient, but better technology is coming along. And there are improvements in technology constantly, and some of them are really kind of mind-boggling. But here what we have is an increase in temperature. Now, last week we reported on this show that the carbon emissions were steady. They were holding steady. And they actually had for 2 years. And so what we've got is rising temperatures with steady carbon emissions. This is not surprising. It is exactly what a scientist would probably think would be likely to happen. And the reason for that is because it takes a long time to heat up the Earth. You put out the carbon, it doesn't heat it up the next day, it heats it up in years to come. And the carbon dioxide that we have in the atmosphere is going to continue to drive atmospheric temperature changes for years to come. And in fact, I've seen estimates that range from based on what would happen, what would be projected to happen if we stopped emitting all carbon right now. We just stopped driving our cars, heating our houses with oil, using industrial technology that puts a lot of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, making electricity with fossil fuels. If we just stopped, some scientists say, well, the temperatures, even though the carbon emissions would stop, the temperatures would continue to go up for about 20 years. Other scientists say, no, they would probably continue to go up for 100 years. And this is something that makes it even all the more important that we do something about these problems. But this is nevertheless the idea that we have already gone up 1.3 degrees Celsius, or 2.43 degrees Fahrenheit, is distressing. In the COP21 conference in Paris, which ended in December of 2015, they agreed that the nations of the earth would keep the number below 2 degrees Celsius, and they said they would try for a much lower temperature and hoped for 1.5 degrees Celsius, and we're seeing projections that 1.5 degrees Celsius is going to be hit within the next 3 years. So we've got a lot to happen here. This article from Clean Technica also mentions the same thing that the earlier article that I read to you, read the synopsis of, says, which is that the El Nino event probably drives short-term oscillation. The long-term warming trend is very apparent in this. The El Nino event would only account for about 0.2 to 0.3 degrees of the 1.35 degrees. Our next item is from the Marshalltown, and it relates to events taking place in Australia. The first 4 days of March saw maximum temperatures in much of Australia 4 degrees Celsius above average and 8 degrees Celsius to 12 degrees Celsius above average in most of the southeastern parts, according to a Climate Council report. It is argued that heat impacts lent urgency to climate mitigation efforts. And I will tell you, this actually is accountable without having to go to climate change. We have always had extreme weather events, and this is an extreme weather event. 12 degrees Celsius, we're talking about 20 degrees Fahrenheit above average. We hit 20 degrees Fahrenheit above average. The thing that's a little bit distressing about this is the fact that this is happening, like what we're seeing in California, in conjunction with a very bad drought. Okay, we're up to Tuesday, March 22nd, and we have a map here. This is from CNews Renewables. The U.S. Bureau of Ocean Energy Management has found a lease request for a floating wind project up to 800 megawatts off California's coast to be qualified, and it will proceed with the next step in the leasing process. It is the first formal interest in wind development off the California coast. And of course, what we're seeing here is a map of California in the upper right-hand corner, and the small rectangle inside that map is the location of the larger map. The wind farm that we are talking about is in the upper left-hand corner of this map. It is the area that is in green. 800 megawatts of wind power is about, it's probably equal to about 400 megawatts of nuclear. The capacity factor for wind power, offshore wind power, is much higher than the capacity factor for onshore wind power, and it is sometimes above 0.5. Nuclear's capacity factor is a little bit above 0.9. So this is going to be a lot of energy going on into the California grid if and when it is produced. Our next item comes from Climate Home. Together, China, India, Vietnam, and Indonesia have plans for 1,825 coal power plants, 3/4 of the total worldwide, but analysis from Energy and Climate Intelligence Unit suggests fewer than half of those, and possibly as few as 500, will be built by 2020. This is from Climate Home, and one thing that I could tell you about this is that there are other numbers that we have talked about, that we have seen, that really should be mentioned in the course of this, the review of this particular article, one of which is that China plans on shutting about 1,000 coal-burning power plants this year. So adding 1,824 power plants in those 4 countries in the course of 3 years or 4 years, 3 years, may not represent any additional coal plants at all, because other coal plants are being shut down. The United States has got practically nothing in the way of coal burning power being put on the grid, practically nothing at all. The last year, as I recall, there was only 3 megawatts, which means that somebody somewhere put on a tiny amount of coal. They probably did that just by increasing the output of one of their plants. Our next item comes from The Verge. Apple announced that 93% of its facilities run on renewable energy, including 100% of its facilities in the United States, China, and 21 other countries. Apple's Vice President of Environment, Policy, and Social Issues made the announcement. Apple has set a goal, had set a goal of 100% renewable power just 2 years ago. And this, of course, tells you something that we have mentioned over and over again. Renewable power can be put on very, very rapidly. It can be brought to the grid at an extremely rapid pace. And if you compare renewable power in that regard, for example, to nuclear, the power plants that are being built, nuclear plants, could be outpaced, even if you take into account capacity factor. They could be far outpaced by solar and wind in the same amount of time and at a lower cost. Nuclear power is what they call the levelized cost of electricity from nuclear power is very high compared to solar and wind. And when you add batteries, nuclear is still more expensive than the batteries. Okay, we're up to Wednesday, March 23rd, which was yesterday. We have an item from an organization called Creative Loafing Tampa. Love that name. Officials of St. Petersburg, Florida, are taking on the seemingly daunting challenge of remaking the way the city consumes energy. It will be one of 100 cities to embark on the Sierra Club's Ready for 100 campaign, opting for 100% renewable energy for all municipal power needs. And there is a picture of St. Petersburg. When they say 100% of all municipal power needs, what they're talking about is the municipal building, the schools, the sewage treatment plant, the police, the fire departments, water pumping facilities, and so forth. There are many, many, many facilities that have to be provided with power in municipalities, but they are only a percentage and not a huge percentage of the electricity that a city will need for its power. And I'm not sure, I forget, I believe the Ready for 100 campaign is really looking at municipal electricity. I may be wrong. But there are many ways of meaning this, not the least of which is to have the sewage treatment plant, for example, generate its own electricity. And it can do that in many cases. I visited a sewage treatment plant in Kenosha, Wisconsin, as I have mentioned on previous shows, where my son, Jeff, put in the centrifuges, and that plant, which uses a lot of electricity, produces all the electricity it uses. And it does this by digesting the sewage that comes in to produce, on the one hand, the methane that is used for powering the plant, and on the other hand, the other thing that comes out of the plant. There are actually several things that come out. One of them is water, which is clean enough that it can be discharged directly into Lake Michigan, right next to a public beach, as a matter of fact. Another thing that they come out with is the solids. And the solids, by the time they come out of that plant, are categorized as a Class A fertilizer by the US EPA, so they can go directly into a field where carrots are raised. I'm not sure that I would go with that, because you never can tell what kind of things can get into sewage that shouldn't be there, and that may not even be tested for. But nevertheless, it tells you that they're doing something that is well beyond the norm at this point. The next item that we have comes from CTV News. PowerStream unveiled Canada's first of its kind virtual power plant. The virtual power plant, dubbed Powerhouse, is meant to showcase how residential customers can simultaneously generate their own clean electricity and work together as a virtual power plant to augment the grid. Now, this is something that I find really interesting because what they're talking about is a small group of people in a neighborhood getting together, making their own power, storing their own power, and using their own power in a local microgrid, which is controlled as a virtual power plant. I talked about virtual power plants earlier in this show. They're doing it, instead of doing it with widely distributed resources that might be used in Mecklenburg-Vorpommern and Denmark and Norway and Belgium. They're doing it with the things that are available locally. And I think that probably means that they are going rather heavily into storage of renewable energy, but the price of storage has gone down so much. It's really remarkable. 2 years ago, 3 years ago, we talked about the fact that analysis of the grid had concluded that when the price of electric power, electric storage fell below $200 per kilowatt hour, and that is, remember, the cost of the thing that stores the power, not the power that's stored. So if your battery cost goes below $200 per kilowatt hour, that is disruptive to the grid. What that means is that people who are on the grid can change their way of consuming electricity because of that storage being so cheap. And it happens that I just bought 2 batteries. They are Aqueon batteries, Aqueon S30s, and I managed to buy them for something less than $2,500. And those batteries are holding 5 kilowatt hours of electricity plus, which means that they're at about $500 per kilowatt hour. And at that price, we are rapidly approaching the $200 point where the grid disruptive abilities come into play. And in fact, this is probably cheaper than the cost of the Tesla Powerwalls, or it's comparable to the Tesla Powerwalls, using a battery that has no particularly toxic materials in it, and which can be used for years and years and years and years. Our last item is from Wind Power Engineering, and it says U.S. wind farms now pay $222 million a year to farming families and other rural landowners, according to new data released by the American Wind Energy Association, with more than 156 million of that going to landowners in counties with below average incomes. And what this is referring to is power that is being generated and put on the grid, but the turbines are sitting on little plots of land that are in farmers' fields. And I have had some dealing with some of the people that this is affecting. I wanted to talk with people who lived in wind farms. There are thousands of people in this country. I have no idea how many thousands, but I would bet that it's tens of thousands of people who live in wind farms. And so I looked at 2 wind farms in particular. Actually, I looked at 2 locations. One of them is in a wind farm. The other one is a city where wind turbines are unregulated. So wind turbines just kind of pop up in people's backyards. And the city where wind turbines pop up is Greensburg, Kansas. And they are very proud of the fact that they are, as they say, 100% powered by wind 100% of the time. The other city, town that I called, Greensburg, is a city of about 800 people because it got blown away by an F5 tornado about 8 years ago before they started putting up wind turbines in their backyards. The other one is Roscoe, Texas, which is a town of about 1,600 people. And what happened in Roscoe, Texas really kind of illustrates what's going on in this particular story. A local cotton farmer decided that maybe they could make some money by renting out small pieces of property to some sort of wind farm that would pay them. And they're not paid a lot of money for this, by the way. This is hundreds of dollars, not tens of thousands. But he thought, wind turbines. They had experience with oil wells, but the oil wells were going dry. And so he went to his neighbors and said, what do you think about wind turbines? And the neighbors went to their neighbors and said, what do you think about wind turbines? And the next thing you know, they had about 400 farmers who were interested in putting their property into this wind farm. And the farmers went around and they finally got a developer who was willing to put their wind turbines in the fields around Roscoe, Texas. And they put in the course of about a year and a half, they put in 634 industrial-sized wind turbines around the town of Roscoe. So what I did, and anybody can do this, I just, you look at churches, you look at schools, you look at hospitals, you look at the municipal building, the library, museums, and you call people. And I called one person at the municipal building, and she answered the phone, and I said, I'd like to ask you about how you feel about wind turbines. And she said, well, our town manager is not here right now. Could he call you back? I said, I don't want to talk with the town manager. He might have an agenda. I want to talk with somebody who is just going to tell me how you feel about wind turbines. And she said that she could do that. So I said, how do you feel about living in a wind farm? And she said, oh, I never thought about the fact that we live in a wind farm. I suppose we do. Well, we like it. Now, there you have the words of a person who lives in a wind farm. And with that, I will say good day to you all. I hope you'll come back next time. I hope you have a wonderful week, or a perfectly lovely week, as our final shot says. And we will see you soon, I hope. I wanna hope gentle rains can fall upon the